Okay, so now we're going to be in chapter 3 of civics. So we're just kind of going through this. We're going to cover all 10 chapters, just the highlighted material of all 10 chapters, and the 7 main standards that goes along with that. Now, this one, we're going to jump ahead to standard number 7. We'll be on standard 7 a few different chapters. This is compare duties and functions of members of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of Alabama's local and state governments and of the national government. So part of the objectives of this is to discuss the early history of the American government, analyze how the U.S. government is set up, and examine the United States Constitution. Like I said, we're going to cover this standard in over a number of different chapters. There's even a whole chapter just on each of the 3 main branches of government. They were originally given the job of revising the Articles of Confederation because what happens after the American Revolution is that they look at the Articles of Confederation and realize that they are not effective, that they can't pass laws and enforce them, that they can't make the people pay taxes. They realize there needed to be a more strong central government. They decided a new constitution needed to be written, and so this is where the Constitutional Convention comes place, which was the meeting that took place in Philadelphia. They were given the job of coming with a constitution that all states would agree to. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the 2 opposing plans, the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And this is how the legislative branch of our government is set up today and how the electoral college works when it comes down to the general election. The Virginia plan was the larger states would get more votes than the smaller states. Now, this is all about representation. Representation is what's important. We've talked about it already in these videos. The representation is important. The Virginia plan says states should get more votes based on the size of the state in terms of population count. Now, states like Virginia that had a lot of people because Virginia was one of the, Jamestown was the first permanent colony. And so we see that the first families of Virginia, that the tobacco industry, all this stuff has made Virginia thriving. So they got a lot of people. So this is a big thing to places like Virginia. The Articles of Confederation only consisted of a legislative branch with 1 house. The new idea was 3 branches. So one idea behind with the Virginia plan was there would be 3 branches of government that would be equal to each other. It would be separation of powers. They would have their own lanes. They'd stay in those lanes and they would work together. These are the legislative branch, which is the law-making body, the executive branch, the law-enforcing body, and the judicial branch, which is the law-interpreting body. Now, like I said, there's going to be entire chapters on this a little bit later on, so don't worry, we'll cover this in detail. The legislative branch makes the laws. This is Congress. This is the House and the Senate. They make laws. The executive branch enforces these. This is the reason why that Donald Trump is over the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the Homeland Security, all these different law enforcement branches, the military, these law enforcement groups, they are under the order of the executive branch. And the judicial branch interprets the law. They're the ones that look and say, okay, this is what the law is. Did you break it? Did this violate this law? What does this law actually mean? It also involved the legislature being divided up into 2 houses. In the Virginia plan, states would have more votes if they were a bigger state, obviously. This made the smaller states worry that the larger states would have more power. So the New Jersey plan focused on each state getting equal representation, each state getting 1 vote. Also, instead of the 2 houses, it would have 1 under New Jersey plan. So it wouldn't have the House and the Senate. It would just have Congress. The larger states did not want to accept this plan. So a committee headed by Roger Sherman came up with an answer. The committee proposed that Congress would have 2 houses. Each state would have equal representation in the Senate, but in the House of Representatives it would depend on state population. This was known as the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise, which was a compromise for the Virginia and New Jersey plans. Now, this is how our government is set up today. In the Senate, there are 100 senators because it's all based on equal representation. Every state gets 2 senators. 50 states, 2 senators. That's 100 senators in all. The House of Representatives is based on representation in the states. So, for example, Alabama has 7 districts. We have 7 members of the House of Representatives. When it comes down to it with the Electoral College, which I'm not going to get into right now, but we'll cover it a little bit later on, the Electoral College takes those 7 members of the House of Representatives and the 2 senators and gives us 9 electoral votes as of right now. Now, of course, the census is coming out. Once they get the census numbers in, that could change. That determines the population count, determines how many districts Alabama has. Is based on that. Alaska, for example, has 1 member of the House of Representatives because their population is so much lower, even though the size of the state is the largest state in landmass. That's kind of a little bit about how that works. Once this problem was solved, they had to issue how to recalculate the population to decide how much representation was needed for each state. At the time, there was 550,000 African Americans in slavery, most of them in the South, and the South wanted to count these slaves as part of their population to increase representation. Now, this could be known as the 3/5 compromise, where they decided every 5 slaves would equal 3 free people. Basically, they were counting each slave as 3/5 of a person. And so for every 5, you would get 3 votes. And so this was a big deal because the South wanted to be counted, but the North was saying, or those opposed to that was saying, well, you don't consider them as people normally. Why should you now? And so, and the South was saying, well, yeah, but they're here, and they should count also. So that was kind of the idea with the 3/5 compromise, was determining how much of the population that slaves would count during this time. All summer, they hammered out the details. On September 17, 1787, they met for the last time. The Constitution was ready to be signed, and the next step was ratification. Ratification just means approval. Each state had to vote yes or no, and needed 9 of the 13 states voting yes to approve it as the law of the land. The Federalists finally agreed that a Bill of Rights was a good idea and promised if the Constitution was adopted, it would have a Bill of Rights. Now, the Anti-Federalists said, we're not going to sign this unless there's a Bill of Rights, because we want to make sure that our rights are protected and the government doesn't get too large, because federalism is a proponent of large government. Anti-Federalists are more states' rights, limited, strong central government. And so the Federalists agreed to put a Bill of Rights in it. And so on June 21st, 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to vote yes, and the Constitution took effect. Rhode Island was the final state to vote yes 2 years later, and the United States of America became official. The Constitution is a good source of how the government should be ran, but at the same time, it is flexible enough to adapt to future change. So the Constitution is the highest authority in the land. The President is under the Constitution. Congress is. The Supreme Court is. The Constitution is our law that everyone's under. The rule of law, everyone's equal under the eyes of the law. The Constitution is the main law that everyone's under. There are 3 main parts of the Constitution, which are the preamble, the 7 articles, and the 27 amendments. We're going to cover those briefly before we end this video. The preamble tells why the Constitution is written. These words make clear that the power comes from the people. And the middle part states the 6 purposes of government. So I'm going to read the preamble real quick, but I invite you to go watch the old Schoolhouse Rock video of the preamble. The we the people in order to form a perfect union, because that is a good way to learn the preamble and to understand what it's talking about. Those videos are great. But it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And that is the preamble, or the introduction, that's describing what the Constitution is going to be talking about. So now we have Article 1, which is the legislative branch. The framers of the Constitution intended for the legislative branch to take a leading role in government. Article 1 says that Congress should be made up of 2 parts, the Senate and the House of Representatives, and would have all lawmaking authority. It states that Congress can collect taxes, regulate foreign and interstate trade, coin money, and declare war. They cannot tax exports or favor one state over another. And that was one of the South's things in there. There was another compromise that the South said, look, We don't want Congress to tax exports because most of what the South did was export goods. They also didn't want them to favor one state over another because they was afraid that one state would get benefits and another state would not. Article 2 is the executive branch, which consists of the president, of course. Article 2 calls for the executive branch to be the law enforcing branch. This will be headed by a president and a vice president. Article 2 states the executive branch has the power to command the armed forces, deal with leaders of other countries, and appoint certain government officials. These are some things. One of the most important government officials that the president can appoint is Supreme Court justices. And, of course, it has to be approved by Congress, but that is a very important part of the president's job. Article 3, the judicial branch states that it's responsible for interpreting law. It calls for one Supreme Court. That's the Supreme Court that we have. It is based off of the judicial branch. It states the judicial branch has the power to hear cases that involve the Constitution, federal law, treaties, and disputes between states. Article 4 shifts the focus to the states. They say that the states must respect each other's laws, court decisions, and records. It also discusses the way to make new states. Keep in mind when they made these that they didn't, the majority of the states hadn't even been made states yet. So this is going to be the way that we're going to go forward in the future making new states. Article 5 discusses how amendments were to be made in the case of future things need to be added, and we're going to see that there are 27 amendments that goes along with this. Article 6 states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. No state or court decision can overrule the Constitution. And Article 7 dealt with practical matters such as making it official that when non-states vote yes, they do ratify and go into effect. These are the 7 articles that make up the middle part of the Constitution. This is how our government is set up based on these articles. Now, amending the Constitution has been amended 27 times. An amendment is any change in the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights are the first 10. We'll discuss these in detail a little bit later on in another chapter. We're not going to go into the details of the Bill of Rights or the other 17 amendments at this point. We'll do that in another chapter, so just kind of keep paying attention. But just to wrap it up, this is how our Constitution is made. It is the divine law or the supreme law of the land. It is over every other law. Every government entity has to follow the Constitution. And so we see that this is a very important part of what goes on within our government and how our government is set up. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you soon.